Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com, and we're at Farmtech 2016, and we're in the Real Ag Lounge, which is our little studio here in the corner, next, very close to the bar. But right now we're joined by
Doug Lipp.
Yeah, and come on, you're being very modest.
Oh, that's right. That's Doug.
So clearly a background with Disney, and famously with Disney U, the book that just book you wrote.
All right.
And have a huge piece in the Disney culture, which is world famous.
Well, I was blessed because I got to work with men and women who worked directly with Walt Disney. I never got to, but my mentors all did, and they had the same kind of tenacity and creativity and heart that Walt had.
Yeah, so Disney is very, very unique for a lot of reasons, but you talked about how Disney is really it is kind of like a manufacturing. It's a factory sort of setting
Right.
from a fun perspective. I was there. I was in California at Disneyland last Christmas, which I'm not. They say it's the happiest place on earth.
Did it snow?
No, it didn't. But I was.
Of course it snowed.
We
It was
joked.
soap bubbles. Come on.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of strollers running into my heels.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Nobody walks anymore. Yeah.
No, that's right. So for a lot of the farmers that were in the audience today, what can you tell them about taking that Disney culture and moving it to the farm? Can you do that?
That's a really good question, Sean, and what I see challenging every organization in the world that I work with, whether they are family-run businesses of 2 to 3 people or they are mid-sized organizations, public or private, is people try to emulate a famous organization, whether it's a Disney or some other company that they say, wow, that's success, I want to have that success. Yet, what underlies the success that we see in operations or financial success is always what goes on backstage, as we'd say at Disneyland, is what are the values? That's the bedrock. And are those values crystal clear to the owners and leaders? So if a husband and wife team and they've got 2 employees, sometimes even between the husband and wife it's not clear, much less with the 2 to 3 employees. Now if you multiply that by hundreds or thousands, the odds of communication misfires are tremendously high. So it's about having crystal clear values, and then how do you bring that to life operational? What's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and what are the consequences?
What I find very, very interesting is that I've read, and I heard today again in your keynote, this power of Walt walking around.
Right.
Why was that such a big deal in terms of his leadership style?
He realized he didn't have all the answers, so he was always a sponge, getting ideas from other people, whether it was from guests, customers, or employees, the cast members. So he didn't let his ego get in the way. And then likewise, it showed support to the front staff, the team, that even the owner takes the time to come out and visit the troops, so to speak. So there was really a multi-pronged approach, but ultimately it was driven by Walt's incessant curiosity of how things were going.
Now, out in the open, the external stage, that all the visitors to Disneyland, Disney World, or the other parks that are around the world, they see a very, very happy culture, an accommodating culture, a culture that is there to make sure that your experience is the best possible experience it can be.
Yeah.
Is it that happy backstage? Is that happy backstage?
Yeah, that's a really important point. My mentor, Van France, and I write about this in the Disney U book, he says, as we treat each other backstage, we will treat our guests on stage. And so if we're not smiling and happy and saying things like good morning to each other, then we're not going to carry that out on stage. So yes, backstage is different than on stage, but the whole idea with Disney and great organizations is they realize their employees are the most important resource. And if they treat the employees with respect and with friendliness and honesty and transparency, then they will take that out into the workplace, whether it's face-to-face or electronic interactions, and be a lot better than if they were treated with disrespect or indifference.
Now you travel the world and speak to companies about culture and creating that sort of Disney-like experience.
Right.
But you always have to find your own experience in that.
Right.
You can't just
Right.
copy it. Do you find that people sort of it's like a moving target, that some people sort of look at corporate culture or company culture as, oh, we've got a good culture. Oh, thank goodness we've been working on that for 2 years. We're done. Now we can focus on something else. Do people look at it that way?
I think yes. The answer is yes, and it's not limited to culture. It's anything that you've worked hard to attain, whether it's a new website or a marketing plan or culture or product. We tend to rest on our laurels, and that's another thing that Walt Disney was keen on. And I'll share with you another quote he shared with his staff at the 10th anniversary of Disneyland. So 1965, 10 years after it opened, tremendous accolades, success worldwide, and he said, you know what? You can't rest on your laurels. We're just starting. In fact, he said, I look at the first 10 years as nothing more than a dress rehearsal. We've just begun.
It's fantastic.
So that incessant approach, or in the Japanese culture it's called kaizen, constantly looking for fine-tuning so that you try to approach perfection. You're never going to get there. So yes, whether it's culture or whether it's a product line, don't sit back.
So I really think the theme of this conference has been storytelling. So we started with Terry O'Reilly from CBC, who is a fantastic storyteller.
Right.
Today, you opened telling stories,
Yes.
right? Teaching people about experience and culture through the art of the story.
Right.
Disney is full of stories.
Right.
What's your favorite story?
Well, you know, the story that I shared in my presentation today about the Lost Princess and how that employee in the form of Snow White helped a young autistic child recenter, and it saved the holiday of not only her but her mom and dad, because Sean, it represents so many moving pieces behind the scenes, and I mentioned it in my keynote, is that a 20-year-old employee who doesn't have 15 PhDs and psychological training was able to help a girl in crisis. And at Disneyland, we spent hours helping our cast members prepare for the untoward. We'd say, how do we handle things when they don't go according to script? And so in totality, my favorite stories are always about how cast members have turned around the day of that mom or that dad or that grandparent or that 4-year-old child who just spilled his box of popcorn and he's gone apoplectic, and you appear out of nowhere and say, hey, I've got a free box of popcorn for Mickey Mouse, would you like it? And the child's eyes light up and mom and dad stop yelling and everybody's happy for a 25-cent box of popcorn. So it's not the magical rides and the technology, it's dealing with that guest who all of a sudden is in crisis, and you're able to turn it around. And there are many, many examples of that, and that's why I chose that one today.
Yeah, what's really interesting about the Disney model is that I'll put it, for a lot of the group here, they're entrepreneurs.
Right.
Right. They've very, very practical, hands-on people.
Right.
And a lot of times when they're dealing with employees, it's like, I just can't find good help, or the guy doesn't know how to drive the tractor, or there's a lot of that kind of probably not enough emphasis on training. Now Disney has parks all over the world, and you talked about the experience with characters,
Right.
The experience with where's the bathroom, in the open hand gesture.
Right.
What % of the time is spent? Like, can you give us an idea about how much training goes into people that work in the parks?
Really good question, and it really boils down to training happens every day, every shift, every hour. It's not limited to the classroom. So the benefit of the Disney University and Disney culture is that training doesn't begin and end in a classroom. What's trained in the classroom is alive and well on the front lines. So what an employee learns in his or her first day of training as a new hire is reinforced every step of the way when they're in the park, as opposed to what happens in a lot of companies that invest a lot of money in training. Then that employee goes out to the front lines and some guy says, I don't care what you learn in training, I'm going to teach you the real thing here.
Yeah.
So every opportunity, whether it's a pre-shift huddle, a post-shift huddle, or interactions for 30 seconds with cast members during the day, is mentoring, training, OJT, on-the-job training.
And a part of that is that feedback loop of, okay, like, is it observation, sort of providing feedback to, no matter what level in the organization?
Yes.
It's
Positive feedback and critical feedback, not being afraid to be transparent.
Yeah. It really is a unique situation. The fact that you have all these people coming from all over the world wanting that ultimate experience. You talked about, spending millions of dollars to go to Disneyland and making sure that each one of them has that ultimate experience. It's
And
a
there's
very,
a lot
it's
of
a very,
pressure.
very tall goal.
A lot of pressure, right? Because when you have a sign outside your property that says the happiest place on earth, I guarantee you there are some people that want to go in there and try to make it the most miserable place on earth, or whether they be an employee or a guest. And so when the bar is set that high, it's really tough to take it even higher.
So do you think social media has impacted the ability to deliver on those things, or has it enhanced it?
Both.
Yeah.
It's just an extension of what's always happened, and it keeps people honest. I think social media is wonderful, and I work with a lot of teams on social media strategies for dealing with that outlier out there who's spreading the negative word. But again, it's about creating your story. And the story that I shared today about the lost princess, when you think about social media, 15 years ago, that story would have been shared minimally. Now, that story is shared by millions because of social media. So it's a double-edged sword, right? It can work for you or against you.
Favorite Disney character? Of course, it has to be. Do you have a favorite Disney movie? One that means the most to you?
Well, it really has to be the one that I shared that Kevin Corcoran was in, Old Yeller, because it brings forth the emotion that Walt brought out in every attraction and every movie, whether it was a cartoon or whether it was live action, is to bring forth the emotion and to have a powerful script. Not necessarily name actors, but they bring forth the emotion both in the audience, but also the characters live it. And it represents, in my mind, a great story that reverberates with every age.
I just had an interesting thought. So if you look at companies like Apple, companies like Disney, there are iconic leaders, founders, people that drove the business.
Right.
Farmers deal with succession all the time, whether you're in the U.S. or in Canada.
Sure.
How do you make sure that some of those values carry on?
It's not only having the stated values, it's also living the values as the owner, as the leader, with your subordinates or with the people that are going to succeed you. And not only doing it, it's talking about while you're doing it. Because some of the entrepreneurs that we know that are so successful are what's called unconsciously competent. They're good, but they don't know why they're good. It just comes naturally. And to develop a subordinate, sometimes you have to drop down a notch and be consciously competent. What is it that I do, that we do, that really does resonate? And that's where you train and bring on board and perpetuate yourself, as if you can elucidate, this is what we do, and this is why we do it. And a lot of the brilliant leaders can't drop down to that level.
I encourage all of our readers in our Real Ag community to check out the book Disney U. I'm sure you can buy it online in your favorite chapter store. And thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate
Cheers.
it.